an action-packed hour for you. And in fact, we have a U.S. representative from North Carolina joining us, Mr. Pat Harrigan, a former Army Special Forces officer serving in the U.S. Representatives, of course, for North Carolina's 10th District, which is a little bit north of us. And then to our west, Mr. Harrigan, as you know, I'm sure you know Charlotte well. But I guess we're having you on the show a little bit more to talk a little bit about the National Guard call that you and I believe two other individuals from our state, I guess, talked about, I think, this week. If you wouldn't mind, kind of go with us what your thoughts on Charlotte as a whole are. As I said, you represent the 10th District, which is close to us. And I'm sure you have some concerns. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of telling us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Colin. Hey, thanks for having me on today. It's great to be with you. Look, a couple weeks ago, the president of the Fraternal Order of Police from Charlotte requested from both Governor Josh Stein and President Trump that they bring the National Guard into Charlotte to deal with a chronic shortage of officers from the CMPD, as well as increasing violent crime in the city. I think just in the last 7 days, we've had 8 murders. Murders are up. The murder rate is up 200% in Uptown right now. My office, even though I don't directly represent Charlotte, I know Charlotte. I love Charlotte. But I get so many requests from folks that are outside of my constituency that live in Charlotte and say, Pat, we need your help. This place is not safe. We don't feel like our home has the law and order that we expect to see from an American city. Can you please get involved here? And look, I think what we want is ultimately we want Governor Josh Stein to consider this. This isn't something where we're just saying, hey, send in the National Guard right now. No, I mean, we want broad consensus over how do we work through the legitimate problems that we have with violent crime and law and order in our cities, and very specifically Charlotte. And I think we can all get on the same page for that effort.
I don't want to split hairs here, Mr. Harrigan. I just want to talk a little bit about CMPD's official data, right? They said, and they told us as well, and I can attest to this because I was able to kind of be a part of this press briefing, that their data shows that they have a 20% drop in violent offenses, specifically in Q3. Now, I understand we're in Q4, so you kind of pointed out just recently where we've been. And I know there's different socioeconomic things going on, especially here in Charlotte, right? It's a metro area. I think folks are feeling a little bit strained. We've talked to other individuals around Charlotte themselves who, talk about a little bit about the violence, right? Could that be a socioeconomic issue? And could the National Guard itself prevent any other violent issues happening? So I hear you on that, but talk about, if you would, CMPD's data. I'm sure you've probably seen that, and there's a number of initiatives in some of the corridors that we have specifically targeting these areas, whether it's drugs, drug trafficking specifically, whether it's the unhoused individuals that we have as well. So what would you say to those numbers from CMPD specifically?
Well, look, I think the statistics can be construed however you want them to be construed, but the reality is you do have hard numbers. The incidence of crime in Charlotte impacts 46 out of every 1,000 Charlotteans. Now, let me give you an example of where this might end up being a misleading stat. We had a video sent to us from a couple weeks ago. It was actually the day after we had the Irina Zarutska and the Logan Federica field hearing for the Judiciary Committee down in Charlotte several weeks back. We had a video sent to my office where in Steel Creek, which is traditionally, has been in years past a safe neighborhood, where you had some hoodlums walking down the street, middle of the night, and fire about 30 shots into a home, right? So when that gets recorded, you're recording that incidence of crime has impacted one household, right? Let's say there's only 2 people inside of that household. Well, that makes up 2 of your 46 right there. But that's not really what happened, because when somebody fires 30 shots in a neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning, houses 20 houses down are impacted by that because nobody feels safe. Like, what is the true metric of whether or not people feel safe? And it's ultimately the response of the constituency of the city. And I'm telling you, they're telling me that they don't feel safe. And so bottom line, we have a problem here. And I think where the National Guard can be helpful is, look, I'm a former special operator. I know how to make a place safer for a period of time. It's very simple. And you've got the top 100 bad guys. You just got to take them off the street. In special operations, we do something completely different. When we're protecting and serving in our nation, we're talking about American citizens. We're not talking about hurting these people. We're talking about incarcerating them. They need to have consequences for criminal activity. Period. We know that's been an issue with judges and magistrates in Charlotte. But what the National Guard can do is take up space and allow the CMPD to go out and do what they do best, which is arrest violent criminals that do not need to be on the streets. The problem is they've had a chronic shortage of 250 to 400 people for as long as I can remember. The National Guard can help come in and displace some of that space and allow the CMPD to get over this hump and start reducing some of these numbers so that Charlotteans feel safe again.
Mr. Harrigan, you pointed out constituency, and in fact, there's a Elon University poll that points out that 47% of people here in North Carolina oppose sending the National Guard to Charlotte. So don't disagree that people are asking you to keep the streets safe. But what would you say the 47% of people who don't want the National Guard sent here?
Well, I'd say 47 is less than 50. And that means that there's a plurality of folks, majority of folks that want this or would at least consider it. And that's all that we're asking too, right? Like, look, there are constitutional concerns here. There's no question about that. Those did not apply to Washington, D.C., but I would invite folks that have very serious concerns from that 47% in Charlotte, come up to Washington, D.C., because when I started in Congress in January to where it is today, because of what President Trump did up there with the National Guard, it is a completely different place. My staff can walk home at night not worried about being the victim of violent crime. It's a completely different place. And, you know, it's not perfect. This isn't a perfect solution, but it has made demonstrable change in the safety and security of that city. And if government does anything for its citizens, it should provide for their protection. So I would just ask those 47% to get past the politics of all this and say, okay, hey, if we've got a problem, what is genuinely the best way to solve it? Let's consider all options and let's work together to do that.
Well said. Gonna ask a little bit more about the National Guard practice. You kind of pointed out you're a special operator. It's a little bit different in the streets, and you know, I'm a civilian, so I wouldn't know anything about, you know, what you had to do, and I appreciate your service, sir. But you know, as you know, United States streets are much different than I'm sure the things that you have seen across the globe. And I think a lot of people are a little bit worried about what that would look like here in Charlotte. We've seen, and in fact, I have been to Chicago. I actually have a brother who looks like me who lives in Pilsen, and was detained for a short time by federal authorities. So I think that there is some some hesitancy, if I can say, especially from Black Americans, that there could be some unfair treatment if and when we do see the National Guard. So I just want to kind of point out, would you kind of specify what that practice could look like here in Charlotte?
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that the National Guard aren't the ones actually doing the work up in Washington, D.C. I think that's what people have a general misunderstanding of, is that these guys are out there on the street corners and they're taking up space. They're eyeballs, another set of eyeballs on every street corner out there, and they're really not doing the work. I mean, I spend most of the time up in Washington, D.C., handing the guys a cup of coffee, patting them on the back, shaking their hands. They're incredibly cordial. They're not out there, causing a ruckus. What they are allowing to have happen is for D.C. Metro Police to go do their jobs. That's what is actually happening with the National Guard. And so really, they're not coming in to do the work. They're coming in to be a force multiplier to allow local law enforcement to get get their hands wrapped around this problem. And certainly, the concerns of violent activity, I think, are unwarranted given the experience that we've seen up in Washington, D.C., because these guys aren't going in and kicking in doors. We're not getting into constitutional issues that could be genuine crises in our cities, particularly if we've got everybody's agreement that, hey, you know what? We've been super short on CMPD officers for a long time. Let's bring in some of the National Guard to help take up some space in some of our, hotbed areas. Use them to take up space, to put another set of eyeballs out there so that CMPD can actually go out and do their job. That's all that would happen. And anybody that says otherwise needs to come take a look at Washington, D.C. and what's actually transpired there.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, as you pointed out earlier, kind of working together to find what works for everyone, but specifically what's best and most efficient for the community that folks live in. So appreciate your time. And I'll just ask this last question here, Representative, anything else that you wanted to elaborate on that we didn't just talk about, or I didn't ask you on anything?
No, Colin, I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and explain why we wrote this letter, why we want to work with Governor Josh Stein and President Trump to solve these problems. I think we all understand, no matter where we are in North Carolina, that our cities are very important to the overall safety and security of our state, the law and order that we have, and we simply just want all of our citizens to feel safe. We want to be able, I'm the father of 2 young daughters, when they grow up, I want them to be able to go down to Charlotte and not end up like Irina Zarutska. I think that's what all Americans want. We want the same things here. We might have some different perspectives on how to get there, but we should open up the aperture and say, what can we agree on here that's reasonable and that has a very high probability of success? And we know that this does have a high probability of success with the National Guard because we've seen it in Washington, D.C. Let's all consider it.
I hear you on that. I've got 4 kids myself. I don't want to see anybody end up like that, especially anyone else's kids here in America. I appreciate that. Yep. Mr. Harrigan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, and have a great rest of your week.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to meet you.